Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Jeff Owens with Dwarven Tavern, and what I am talking to you about tonight, it's not a review or a game or anything like that, but it revolves around Dungeons and Dragons, of course. And what I'm going to be doing is presenting a series of talks about about the game and about my experiences with the game from early on and my first experiences as a dungeon master and just for posterity, I guess. Um, I know there's a lot of folks out there who like to uh, learn from uh, the old timers. Not that I'm an old timer, mind you, but I do have a lot of experience in the game, many years, and it it is one of those instances where I have a lot to share, and it's it's a lot of fun to share. I have a master's degree in education, and so my teaching instinct is very strong, um, and I just like putting myself out there and letting people see who I am and what I'm about and what got me to where I am today. And so my just going back to the beginning, uh, I had a friend. I still have a friend uh, or two, um, but my buddy Gary uh, introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons when I was 15. I was 15 years old. That makes it a long time ago. And so he said, "There's this game that we got to play." He said, I've been playing it for a little while now, and I wanted to tell you about it. It's a game called Dungeons and Dragons, and like many other people got started. A friend goes, "Hey, this is a cool thing." Um, so I said, "Sure, I will try it. It sounds like fun." Now, up until that time, board games was it, card games, whatever. Dungeons and Dragons, I thought it was a new board game or something that uh, we could play, which I was always up for. But then, he told me to go and buy the basic box set, basic D&D. This was first edition, of course, back in the I think it was 1979, and so I bought the game and I opened the box, and it was frickin' phenomenal. I couldn't believe it. It was a game that had economics, it had languages, it had different races, um, and I don't believe uh, that I had ever seen anything like it before. And so uh, I read it. I consumed it. I absolutely devoured it. And when uh, when I finished reading it, the basic book, uh, I was thoroughly sold, and I wanted a dungeon master immediately. And Gary, my buddy Gary, he said well, you can play first. Um, it would probably be a good idea if you played first and before you actually started running the game, because it's a lot. It's involved quite a bit. And I said, "Oh, whatever, man. I'm game for anything. This looks amazing, and I can't wait to start." So I rolled up my first character with his help, Was it with his help? I think it was. It may have been, may not. I don't know. But my first character's name was Sargoth, and I uh, I rolled up. He was just a fighter. I wanted to be a fighter, and so I rolled up a fighter, and he and a sidekick because Gary told me to roll up two characters because with, excuse me, put myself to sleep. He told me that when I wanted to play a new character, me being a new player, that I should probably roll up two in case the first one died, and I was like, oh my god. So I rolled up Sargoth and his best friend Isaac Green Arrow, who was he was a ranger, and so the two of them set out, and we played through the Caves of Chaos and the Keep on a Borderland from the original, the original basic box set, and I uh, um, yeah, I always have a spare, and so I went through the Caves of Chaos, and I lost my first uh, elven rope. I tried to tie up a bunch of zombies with it. I tried to be smart, and they just cut the rope, and so the elven rope was lost. And I had a pair of war dogs named Julius and Baron. I bought them, gave them some leather armor because I could afford it, and they actually did more than Sargoth did because they were frickin' mastiff hounds. So there you go. And it was all in all, it was a rousing success. I also had a dwarf named Dakin after that, shortly thereafter. Fell in love with dwarves, and I had read. I think the most recent book I had read before starting Dungeons and Dragons was the Sword of Shannara, and I was just thoroughly in love with Hindle, the dwarf, with his big bone crunching mace, as they often described it. Uh, they described it as a bone crunching mace a lot, quite often. It's like, well, don't you have any other adjectives? Um, so I rolled up Dakin, who he had an axe, which I love my axes, and I just got a new one. By the way, I don't know if you've seen it. It's a lovely, lovely little CAS Iberia axe, and it's very lovely. It's a nice little Viking axe. It could chop, we could chop us some wood with it. It's a nice edge, um, and it's got a nice long handle. So batter up. So Dakin had his battle axe, and um, Sargoth had his longsword, and that's where I found my first magical item, which was a +1 flame tongue longsword. And man, and holy crap, my mind exploded with potential and all the possibilities for the magical adventures that could arrive from that. So I immediately began. Creating uh, my very first dungeon, and I asked Gary. I said, "What had been the biggest dungeon that you'd ever been in at that point?" Because I wanted a yardstick by which to measure my own possible accomplishments. And he said, "Well," he said, "I had been." He said, "I think the largest one I had been up to this point was, I think it was like 6 levels down, and it was like a couple levels up above whatever." I'm like, okay, so you go in at a ground level. You can have levels down, levels up, and I was, measuring and calculating and doing all this stuff, and in my head, and just trying to kind of absorb it and learn it as I went, and which I did. So I said, okay, well then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a dungeon, and because I really want a dungeon master, and I want to create a dungeon. Um, it's going to be 10 levels down and 5 levels up. And he said, "Wow, that's a pretty big order for a newbie." And I said, "Well, I've had the game for a couple of months now, and I think I'm ready." And because I was a literal sponge, not a literal sponge. Well, kind of. My skin is it is porous, so. Um, so yeah, I absorbed the rules, and I rolled up the first level, and the way I was going to do it was um, I was going to make a level and see how they got through it, if they got through it, and then uh, as they approached the end of that level, I was going to begin working on the next level, and so forth until the whole thing was done. Um, so uh, I didn't I didn't ask them. Gary, because he was the only person that I knew personally that played D&D. Um, so I didn't ask him to roll up new characters uh, for it. I just said, what do you have? And he said, well, I have 4 characters that I would like to bring in, and I'll we'll see how you do with them from there. Just to see how you're balanced. And he said they are. I think they averaged at 5th level because he had a ranger, he had uh, he had a ranger, he had a wizard thief, and he had a bard in the works, in the making, and he had a paladin, and they were all around fifth, 6th level. I'm like, okay, I don't know what it means, but sure. um, which was fine because I didn't, you know. Now when I start a new game, I tell everybody to bring in brand new characters. Uh, I don't really know why I started that, but anyway, it was Mithridel the Ranger, uh, Valinor the Paladin, Eberron was a fighter thief or fighter. He was a wizard thief, and then there was he had a character named Hagen who was a bard, and his character Hagen had a weird like split personality thing where he would switch back and forth to Gorgon, and was a fighter. And the one thing that both of these characters' personalities had were the fact that they absolutely hated orcs. They went he went berserk to kill orcs. So I tried to design the first level for starting level for 5th, 6th level characters. So I had pretty standard fare. I put in a bunch of sturges and orcs and manticores and traps galore, and it had about 30 or 40 rooms that needed to be cleared before they could get through it. And I said, this is what it's going to be, and so I'm ready to begin when you are. And so he designed he brought his characters through the um, through the town just outside the dungeon, and the way it started was they were a group of adventurers. The background was a group of adventurers who uh, had just finished up a job and they were looking for work, and they rode their horses into this small town that had been uh, surrounded by. It was a human settlement, not very much larger than a village. Um, Wooden buildings, structures, and really crudely erected wooden palisades. And they rode into it. The gates were open, but the whole village was being policed by gnolls, and they thought this was extremely odd. The people uh, looked oppressed. They were not happy. They weren't getting along with the gnolls at all. Gnolls being gnolls and bullies and such. So um, they asked around for a while, and nobody was talking until finally they met uh, Jimsa Tasmorian, who was the barkeep. He was the stereotypical, gruff barkeep that didn't mind sharing a rumor or two. And he told him, the story. He said that a few hundred years had passed. Was it a few hundred? It wasn't a few hundred years. It was quite some time. He didn't tell him how long had passed, but he said quite some time had passed that this town has been under the watchful eye of the dark ones in the tower in the castle uh, that loomed at the foot of the mountain to the north. And they were like, well, what's the story of that? And he said, well, it used to be a castle that was the it was the edifice of this council called the Teskai, and they were all very benevolent uh, conclave. They were a benevolent conclave of wizards and priests who, for the good of the people, watched over things and kept the land, kept the harvests plentiful and kept the weather good, and kind of a paradise for what seemed like, an eternity of pleasantness. And then one day, uh, the whole thing was brought to an end by a great siege that was led by a black-skinned giant uh, who called himself Lunatic, who was that was either his name or his title, but they knew it to be a fire giant, and he assailed the castle and brought it down, and there was rumors that one of the Teskai had betrayed the others and brought the castle down from within. and no one who had gone to investigate the thing had returned, of course, you know, and very, very little news had come out. The only thing that did come out of the castle was a host of gnolls that locked the land in a death grip of taxation and oppression, and they were looking for a way out. So any help these guys could give them would be very much appreciated. So they conferred for a while, and of course, the paladin was like, "Well, this cannot be allowed to stand. I'm have to do something about it." And the rest of them were like, "Yeah, sure. We could probably get some loot and all this stuff." And the most impressive thing about it was that these four characters talked amongst themselves to decide, and they took a vote. But you have to remember, these guys, all four of these guys, were being played by the same character. So Gary was he was already a very accomplished role player, because he had a really heartfelt conversation amongst himself, and so he did a very good job of that. Now, the other thing was that I wasn't aware of uh, my dislike for uh, metagaming at the time, and I didn't actually learn, because Gary was he was a very good role player, and he didn't metagame. Um, and so I didn't actually learn about metagaming until way later, when I would talk to someone who wasn't very good at it, and he was talking about, well, this this dungeon, obviously, you haven't finished it, because there's a left turn, and it shouldn't have dead ended here, so I think maybe you didn't finish this part of it. I'm like, the hell are you talking about? Why are you talking like that? You're not. Who are you talking to? And because I was talking about his character, he was just metagaming, and it was annoying, and that's when I first developed my distaste for metagaming. Early on, doesn't take much. Um, so Gary, he said, well, I don't know how, if it's being guarded by giants and the like, I don't know how we can get into it. And the barkeep said, well, I'll let my son take you to the secret. Um, the secret entrance is there's a trap door just out in the middle of the field, where people have been seen to go. We know this is a secret way in, and he said he'll guide you there. So they're okay. So on their way there, they encountered a group of gnolls on horseback, who apparently had heard, because the tavern, the walls have ears, and someone informed on them, and so they attacked, and they fought, and they killed the gnolls, but not before they impaled the guy's son um, with a lance, because they had their heavy lances out, and so with the gnolls dead, and their spells spent, they just had to they held the boy until he died, because they didn't have a healer. The paladin had already used all of his laying of hands for the day, because it was a pretty formidable uh, contingency of gnolls. So uh, they didn't realize that the boy had been mortally wounded until after he had already expended his healing abilities. They had no healing potions or anything like that. So as the boy lay dying, he said in a voice that was not his, he said, "Remember the keys." And then he died. And they're like, "Okay, well, we got to look for keys." So that's when they went in to they went into the hole in the ground, went through the trap door, and went into. It was like a flight of stairs down into, maybe, I don't know. It went down maybe 50 or 100 feet underground. It was just a single flight of stairs, and then it led to this small corridor. And on the way, they had encountered it was a collapse in the tunnel, and it was like 5 miles to the castle. So they had a pretty good way to go in this tunnel. On the way, they discovered a giant trapdoor spider had collapsed the tunnel and had made a home there. And they fought it and they killed it, but not before the tunnel behind them had collapsed. Um, and there was just total cave in, so they had no choice but to go on, to go forward. And so at that point in time, they went forward, they moved forward, and when they entered the first room of Bolgan's dungeon, um, that would be the beginning of a 3.5 year campaign, and it went so well, that first dungeon level. It had gone so well that Gary, the next time, the next week, he came to me and he said, "Look, I got this guy. I know he's hyper and a little bit squirrely, but he's a good guy and he loves D&D. His name's Jeff, and he would like to join us. He also has 4 characters, and so what do you say?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds awesome." So then after that, Jeff and Gary would come down every week, every weekend, and then sometimes one of them would sneak down through the week, and I would the way my room was set up at home, because I was being 15, I was still living at home, of course. Um, I would get out of bed. Actually, I wouldn't get out of bed. They would come in. I had a piano stool as a night table, and it had my DM screen on it, and I would roll out of bed, sit up, and then yawn and stretch and grab my dice and say, "Okay, roll initiative," and we would just start gaming from there. And we did this at least once a week, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, uh, until it was done for the next 3.5 years. Um, and there was a lot of stuff happened in between. We had fights amongst ourselves. Friendships came and gone, and then they came back. And it was an amazing journey. It was an amazing journey, and so as I go, I have since lost that dungeon. I believe it was lost uh, probably 20 years ago in a flooded basement when we lived out east from where we live now. Um, all the maps and things are gone, but the memory of it is indelibly tattooed into my neurons. So what I plan to do is, in the coming streams, I will recall as much as I can remember, and then from that led to another campaign, and then that led to another campaign, and it was from first edition uh, to second edition to third and 3.5 and beyond. And it's just kind of a continuance of the same characters. So I'll introduce you to all of the characters like Bolgan, the wizard, and his wife Hulda, and the conclave of wizards that ultimately fell to the betrayer, and all of the characters that came from it, including a really weird experiment that everybody warned us not to do when we brought our own selves, me, into the game, and we translated ourselves into gaming terms, and actually went through a warp and became characters. And we know now why it's a dangerous thing to do, because and I'll get to that in time. But um, it just led to all kinds of life lessons and deep, meaningful, philosophical uh, epiphanies and the like. And it also, shaped. It had a very large impact on myself as a human being, and to who I am now as being starting out as a dungeon master and ending as a teacher, as a college professor of things like you know theology and computer applications and computer science and English and history and astrophysics and math and all the things that I've taught. It's just I really just kind of owe that to Dungeons and Dragons, and playing the game. It really made me who I am and who I continue to be. Um, and it also shaped my kids' lives and continues to do so. You've seen Lyric and Ian, the Taverniers. Those are two of my youngins, and they continue on. They will pick up the mantle when I can no longer do so myself. Um, and So yeah, that's basically the first part, kind of an introduction into what's going to happen, and I will reveal the chapters as we go, so you can see exactly what I went through and how I got there, and what happened and why I did what I did when I did something. Um, and it turned out to be, one of the best and worst experiences of my life as time went on, and a lot of lessons to be had. So at that, I am going to. Oh, and plus, also in the coming weeks, uh, I'm going to be streaming a lot. So in the coming weeks, I will be doing reviews. I just got a brand new game. It's not a game. It's a brand new piece of software uh, from um, I don't even know the company's name, but it's called Dungeon Painter Studio. I did a review of Campaign Cartographer, which has been a program that I've used a lot, and I just found this Dungeon Painter Studio that looks like it might be a real strong. Uh, it might be a real strong contender, competitor for Campaign Cartographer. So I'm going to be reviewing that. Plus, I've got some new stuff from Paizo and a lot of other companies that I'm going to be reviewing, and blah blah blah. List goes on. So I'll be getting through that as we go. And then I'm going to get to that Rifts game as I promised on the YouTube channel. I'm learning that, and so I'll continue to do so. Because everybody's like, "Where's part two?" And I know I've been bad. I've been really remiss. So I'm going to get to that. But in the meantime, the next stream will be me talking about the first layer, the first level of the dungeon, and the things that I did, which was interesting, and the naming conventions and things like that. Because I look back on some of the names that I had given to some of the things, and it's corny and dumb and kind of embarrassing, but I will, I'll let you know all that stuff. So that is me. I'm Dr. Jeff Goins, and on behalf of the entire cast and crew of the Dwarven Tavern, I would like to let you folks know that we wish for you to want for nothing but adventure. And at first I feared it, then I charged, and I petted my little kitty cat Xena, she's a monster for attention. Um, and thank you very much for watching. Love you all, and we'll see you next time.